As a music fan, think for a second about what is your favorite album of all time. Let's say you got locked up, you did something stupid, you went to jail, you couldn't listen to music, and then one day, years later, you got out. What's the first album you would go revisit? Today, we're going to talk about mine. And my favorite album happens to be celebrating its 30th anniversary on April 25th. The most key album to understanding my personal musical tastes lies squarely in Mobb Deep's second album, The Infamous. I'm doing this video in honor of The Infamous's milestone, but my hope is that this video is evergreen. It will always apply no matter if The Infamous is celebrating its 30th, 35th, 40th, 50th, 100th anniversary, because this is a record that has managed to transcend time and different eras of hip-hop, and it does remain one of the most influential hip-hop albums to ever come out of New York City. Many of you classic hip-hop fans out there, you'll know what I'm talking about when I say that there's something about artists from Queensbridge that just make them different. Whether it's a group or act coming from the golden age, such as the Juice Crew, or that second wave of Queensbridge artists that really broke out in the mid-90s, which was Mobb Deep's era, Queensbridge artists always seemed to employ a certain sense of confidence that was often juxtaposed with kind of this angry sense of desperation and hopelessness. As Nas chronicled on his 1994 classic Illmatic, Queensbridge, simply put, was not a pleasant place to live in the 90s. Illmatic's just one example of that lyrical urgency on records that come from the bridge, but the most classic Queensbridge records are often coupled with this kind of really dark noir production, as I will call it, which provides this grimy existential malaise to the overall musical atmosphere. So like I said, we had the golden age, we had the Juice Crew, and then things kind of stepped back a little bit in New York hip-hop for a couple years, but Illmatic was a benchmark. Following Illmatic, there was a new, very distinctive wave of artists that emerged from Queensbridge, including Cormega, Capone, Screwball, Lake, Nature. These were not really new artists, they were a new wave of artists, but many of them had been rapping for years at that point, but none of them had really done anything notable on record until the mid-90s. Mobb Deep was a part of this wave, and they were actually an exception to this rule. They had made some notable inroads in the music industry prior to Illmatic, and they were reinventing their sound by the mid-90s. They were one album in, and while they were still teenagers, they experienced plenty of industry adversity and struggle to that point. Consisting of Prodigy and Havoc, the duo met at Manhattan School of Art and Design. Now, Havoc was a Queensbridge native, while Prodigy hailed from Left Rack City by way of a few towns on Long Island. The two came together in 1989 as Prodigy was introduced to Havoc as Havoc was participating in a schoolyard knife fight, as the story goes. The two met. Havoc actually planned to rob Prodigy, but quickly warmed up to him, and the two struck up a fast friendship, bonding over a shared interest of hip-hop music and artistry. And really within a few months of knowing each other, they started working on music together. It was in these first sessions that the duo decided to call themselves the Poetical Prophets. As the 90s began, Poetical Prophets started dedicating more and more time to music and decided they wanted to take it seriously, and they generated just enough buzz and knew enough people to create some industry connections. They routinely stood outside of various record label headquarters throughout the city, pushing their demo tapes to record execs and already established rappers as they would come and go. The first big name that really took the time to acknowledge Poetical Prophets was none other than Q-Tip from A Tribe Called Quest. And though Tip initially passed on Poetical Prophets at the beginning of the 90s, he would eventually warm up to Prodigy and Havoc and contributed a very massive part of what made The Infamous great. Havoc and Prodigy kept grinding on their own, which eventually landed them a spot in the Source's unsigned hype column. This was in about 1991, and because of this exposure, they were offered a record deal with 4th and B-Way Records. They changed their name from Poetical Prophets to Mobb Deep and headed into the studio in 1992. They were, I think, 17 or 18 years old when they started recording their debut album, so they were getting into the business pretty early. The creative process for their debut record was supposedly rushed, and the label wasn't super supportive along the way. Juvenile Hell was released in early 1993, and while it did generate some buzz, it did not do very well, and pretty rapidly Havoc and Prodigy were dropped from 4th and B-Way Records. At this time, they considered quitting the music business and going their own separate ways. But due to the success of Wu-Tang Clan and Protect Your Neck, which was making the rounds at the time on the newly formed label Loud Records, an opportunity emerged for Mobb Deep by 1994. Due to Wu-Tang's success, Loud was expanding rapidly and was looking to sign new artists. Mobb Deep fit the mold perfectly and had a key connection in their back pocket. If you remember the unsigned hype column I mentioned, it was written by somebody named Mateo Capoluongo, better known as Matty C, who was an A&R at Loud Records at the time. Because of the column, the two parties had history, and this proved essential for Prodigy and Havoc. Through Matty C, they set up a meeting with Loud, who had an open roster spot for the next hardcore artist. It was a perfect fit for both sides, and in 1994, Mobb Deep were signed to Loud Records. While Juvenile Hell was definitely a hardcore album that featured gritty beats and vulgar lyricism, as a whole, it sounded unrefined and unfocused. So Havoc and P decided to rebrand their sound a little bit. They built off of what worked well with Juvenile Hell and got rid of what didn't. With the direction of Matty C and another A&R by the name of Scott Free, Mobb Deep adopted a similar similar formula which allowed Wu-Tang Clan to explode. This was hard, guttural beats that acted as a backdrop for unfiltered tales of street life. This formula, which was the foundation of hip-hop's ongoing East Coast renaissance, had been adopted by Nas, Big L, Notorious B.I.G., and others. Scott Free and Matt Life took Havoc and Prodigy under their wing, and they used industry connections to help bring established artists into the creative process for Mobb Deep's upcoming second album. By the middle of 1994, Prodigy and Havoc had released the promotional single Shook Ones, which had sort of a new edge to it. It was already more gritty than anything that was on Juvenile Hell. The song was dusty, it was raw, and it lacked any real melody, but it was somewhat successful given the changing climate of New York and East Coast hip-hop. This original version of Shook Ones really helped lay the foundation for what was the new Mobb Deep sound, and showcased just how poignant, ruthless, and menacing they could be as lyricists. So all of a sudden, Havoc and Prodigy kind of had a new hype surrounding them as they continued work on their second record. For such young artists, they had that previous experience which truly did give them a leg up. The recording and business part of making an album really was nothing new to them. As a result, they had enough regimen, skill, and creative awareness to kind of take the driver's seat in the creative process. And they would end up producing a large chunk of the album, despite the fact that they were just turning 20 years old. Perhaps due to the fact that Poetical Prophets were so persistent years earlier and caught the attention of somebody like Q-Tip, he had taken a shine to Mobb Deep by the time they were working on their next album. This could have also been due to the connections with Matty C and Scott Free, regardless of why at the time Q-Tip was between A Tribe Called Quest albums and had time to handle mastering duties as well as the production duties for 3 of the tracks on the upcoming album. And while Prodigy and Havoc were focused on providing the most hardcore soundscapes possible, Tip's presence gave the record kind of a more upbeat mood in spots, which perhaps accidentally gave this record some sonic versatility, which is something that it's best known for, and a lot of the hip-hop records that were coming out at the time actually lacked this sonic versatility. The creative process wrapped up in early 1995, and just before they wrapped for the album, they released a newer version of Shook Ones. Shook Ones Part 2 was officially released in February 1995 after making its way around the radio circuits as early as late 1994. The song was automatically slated as the lead single from the upcoming album, and its extremely menacing soundscape and jaw-dropping lyrics set the stage for New York hip-hop's next bombshell. The final result of all this work culminated in what is now considered one of hip-hop's most heralded albums of all time, and Mobb Deep's second album, The Infamous, was released on April 25th, 1995. By the time it came out that spring, New York hip-hop's renaissance had been underway for about a year and a half. So the record didn't really set trends as much as it raised existing standards. It took the formula that worked for recent New York records and dragged it down deep into the depths of despair. Its lyrics were unapologetically vivid and stark, and The Infamous was arguably at the time the bleakest record out musically and lyrically. Just a reminder, if you like what you're seeing, make sure to hit that subscribe button and join my community to be notified whenever I drop new content. Also, leave me a comment below and let's discuss what you think of The Infamous. The album actually starts on a bit of a light note as Havoc and Prodigy make their introduction over a relatively calm and cerebral beat on the start of Your Ending 41st side. Prodigy sets the stage here, letting the listener know that Mobb Deep was back and better than ever, and was ready to send New York hip-hop into a bleak new abyss. The infamous prelude, which is a spoken word tirade that immediately follows, calls out anybody who wasn't a friend of the mob. While this was kind of a shit-talking and seemingly insignificant interlude, it somehow caught the attention of EPMD affiliate Keith Murray, which led to a bitter conflict. The third track is where things take one of the darkest turns that hip-hop had seen to that point. Survival of the Fittest comes in with an absolutely chilling, almost terrifying piano loop, which is as harsh as it got for 1995, and finds Havoc and Prodigy telling their street-level tales from what sounded like the depths of hell. Prodigy compares the level of violence in and around Queensbridge to that of the Vietnam War, and mentioned that the police didn't have any chance in making a dent in the ever-existing chaos. In recent years, Survival of the Fittest has become one of Mobb Deep's most recognizable songs, and it's synonymous with the duo almost in the same way that Shook Ones Part 2 is. It's a quintessential example of the darkest depths of mid-90s New York hip-hop, and it blatantly highlights just how bleak life in the inner city could be. On The Infamous, Mobb Deep did most of the work when it came to the lyrics and beats. However, once again, the duo was well connected due to its street cred as well as its relationship with Loud Records staff. Both of these things came to fruition on Eye for Eye, Your Beef Is Mine's, the fourth track, which featured Nas and Wu-Tang's Raekwon. Havoc, Prodigy, and Nas apparently spent a good deal of time together in Queensbridge before anyone had a record deal, so there was probably already a pretty good deal of rapport there. Nas was riding high on the success of Illmatic, and his inclusion on The Infamous only raised the record's profile. In Raekwon's case, he was a label mate of Mobb Deep, both through Wu-Tang as a group as well as the solo contract that RZA had negotiated for him. The four rappers come together seamlessly on Eye for Eye, which features a deliberate, anxious, ominous soundscape created by Havoc. The song features two of the best verses on the album, one by Prodigy and one by a fully established and unstoppably confident Nas. The wordplay, the descriptiveness, the environment that both Nas and Prodigy set is just unmatched. With all due respect to Raekwon and Havoc, who chip in with solid verses, Nas and Prodigy steal the show on this song. Eye for Eye is actually one of New York hip-hop's watershed moments in the mid-90s. It serves as one of the first appearances of a mafioso lyrical theme, at least in the mid-90s, which quickly became a central component of East Coast hip-hop by about 1996. We hear Prodigy mentioning how his jewels resemble that of Liberace, before going on to describe how it feels when he opens the sunroof to his luxury car, having the cold air breeze through the buttersoft leather upholstery. Havoc mentions his desires to hang out in a hot tub and sip champagne, and this was just the start of this lavish mafioso trend that would quickly emerge throughout 1995. And it actually brought New York hip-hop to its knees just 2 years later. I did a video about this, I'll link it up in the corner. As the album moves on, it returns the listener to the gritty reality that is Queensbridge, and we see Mobb Deep affiliate Big Noyd come in on Just Step Prelude. This is a 1-minute kind of a cappella freestyle between Prodigy and Noyd, trading verses about trials and tribulations with the law. It's an enjoyable little cut, and this was not Big Noyd's first appearance on a Mobb Deep song. He appeared on the track Stomp 'Em Out from Juvenile Hell just 2 years earlier. Noyd, Prodigy, and Havoc get back on a beat on the 6th track, Give Up the Goods, Just Step, which also marks the first of 3 production credits from Q-Tip. The atmosphere of the song is a little bit more relaxed, though the subject material reminds the listener that Noyd, Prodigy, and Havoc are stick-up kids that should not be fucked with. While Q-Tip digs up a mellow sample, he also inserts some very crisp and satisfying drums, which perfectly complement the gritty subject matter. On the 7th track, Temperatures Rising, sonically, things stay on the lighter side, and this is the second Q-Tip beat on the record. Havoc and Prodigy get kind of a laid-back backdrop to honor Havoc's estranged brother, Killer Black. At the time the song was recorded, Black was on the run from the law due to his alleged involvement in a murder in Queensbridge, so Havoc and Prodigy come together here and address Killer Black through song. Havoc especially shines lyrically on this track. His entire verse is quotable, it's borderline heartfelt at times, which is something that was rare for this degree of hardcore hip-hop. Black would eventually end up getting caught and was sent to jail for about a year. In the years since Temperatures Rising, there's been a little bit of light shed on the whole Killer Black story, and this was well documented in Prodigy's 2011 autobiography, My Infamous Life, and it is kind of a crazy story that does end in tragedy. But overall, Mobb Deep's Ode to Their Compatriot is a track unlike anything hip-hop had probably heard to that time. It just showed how stark and serious their situation was as they made their transition from the streets to the music industry. The next track, Up North Trip, brings some of the duo's swagger back, as Havoc and Prodigy lay out a narrative of being arrested for a crime before being transferred to Rikers Island, and then eventually to an upstate New York prison, which is where the majority of the criminals from the city end up. Track 9, Trife Life, weaves a tale of rival crews using women to get their opponents into a precarious situation. Like Temperatures Rising and Up North Trip, Trife Life is split into 2 very long verses, one from each MC, and there is some top-notch storytelling on this track. The 10th song is QU Hectic, and it's one of the more underrated songs in Mobb Deep's catalog. I think it's a little overshadowed just solely by being on the Infamous by higher profile tracks, but without Shook Ones and Survival of the Fittest, this might be one of the best songs that Mobb Deep ever did. It features an intelligently selected saxophone sample by Havoc, who also incorporates this stunning, swirling, low-range keyboard or bass sample. I'm not really sure what that is, but it sounds really freaking awesome. And then he tops it off with this strange alarm-like sound effect. That's not the last time we would hear that sample on this album. Prodigy and Havoc trade bars within their verses, and they pay homage to their home borough of Queens, further illustrating the disturbing things that tend to go on within Queensbridge in particular. Right Back At You brings Raekwon back for another round, with his right-hand man Ghostface Killah appearing this time. Big Noyd joins the mix once again, as well as the 5 rappers navigate their way through more verbal warnings and mafioso-style lyrics. After a brief but terrifying interlude, the song Cradle to the Grave comes in, and this is one of the darkest songs Mobb Deep has ever done. And if you know Mobb Deep, you know how dark they can get. This is probably the extreme end of the spectrum. Havoc sets the stage with this tentative guitar sample, throwing his crisp trademark drums over the guitar riff. So Prodigy and Havoc lyrically just both enter the next level of hell on Cradle to the Grave. Actively plotting out the murder of one of their associates who was caught snitching. The murder never actually happens in the song, which leaves the listener guessing. And they trade lines back and forth through their verses, kind of setting up the illusion that the two were working together to serve street justice. Songs like Cradle to the Grave just illustrate how dark and demoralizing things could be in inner city New York in the late 20th century. And while the violence is heavily emphasized on Cradle to the Grave as well as the rest of the Infamous, Havoc and Prodigy, they're not really glorifying it, they're serving more as messengers and reporting on what is happening on the streets of their neighborhood. And if you think about it, Nas kind of did the same thing on Illmatic, though it definitely wasn't as graphic and violent as Mobb Deep got on the Infamous. Just as the mood gets ultra serious, the Infamous's secret weapon is summoned once again, and it's Q-Tip. Drink Away the Pain Situations ends up being one of the most mellow moments on the entire record, and Q-Tip actually contributes a verse here. Prodigy kicks off the song here by addressing his alcoholism and compares it to the love of a woman. His ode to Danny, as they call it, is met with a slew of double entendres, as he reveals that he first discovered Danny, also known as St. Ides, as a teenager. Havoc follows the same model. Instead, he's professing his love for Hennessy. It's debaucherous, let's be honest, but it's also one of the most clever moments on this record. At the same time, it's also a moment that notably sheds light on just how big of a problem teenage alcoholism was in inner cities. And Q-Tip uses the same metaphor, but instead of alcohol, he talks about fashion, mentions how clothes and fashion are captivating and addicting in the same way as a substance. He humanizes a number of brand names, calling them out as part of a criminal enterprise. Q-Tip uses this as kind of a fashion roll call of sorts, or at least an acknowledgement of just how important of a role fashion and clothes would play in hip-hop and the culture as a whole, especially among more materialistic rappers. And then, seemingly out of nowhere, buried 15 tracks and 1 hour deep into the infamous, comes Shook One's Part 2. The listener's attention is immediately demanded by an iconic hi-hat drum pattern, and there's that same familiar alarm again from QU Hectic. As the various samples build in the opening seconds of the track, Prodigy dedicates the song to all the killers and $100 billers. Havoc's bass line winds up, and then possibly the most magical piano sample in all of hip-hop comes right in. This piano loop on Shook One's, it's one of the most impressive sample chops of all time. It took actually until the early 2010s for someone to snitch on the sample and uncover exactly what Havoc did, as it features an extremely chopped and down-pitched piano passage that was actually done in the same exact way as Survival of the Fittest. The sample actually comes from jazz musician Herbie Hancock's Jessica, and both Shook One's and Survival of the Fittest were these extremely dark, decadent songs that had their piano loops sampled from relatively upbeat jazz songs. Havoc was a master of disguise, a master of melodic darkness. The chopped piano loop mixed with his homegrown bass line combined to form this unspeakably gloomy yet somehow beautiful end product. Shook One's Part 2 is not as lyrically dark as Survival of the Fittest or Cradle to the Grave, but it still paints a bleak and dangerous picture, albeit in a way that didn't involve any cursing, which was enough to give an unabridged version of the song some decent radio airplay. Even though Havoc and Prodigy did stay FCC compliant, they did not pull any punches. P's verse ends on just this unfathomably bleak note, as he contemplates his death on the streets of Queens, remarking that if there's a place to go, this is it. The chorus for Shook One's Part 2 is one of the most iconic in hip-hop history, as it remarks that you're either ready to survive in the streets and handle your business no matter how ruthless it may be, or you're a pretender. Immediately after the chorus, Havoc comes in and drops what's probably his best verse on the whole album. He wonders if all the bad he's done on the streets will catch up with him in the afterlife. Shook One's was so impactful and groundbreaking that it brought international success to Mobb Deep. Today, it's one of the most influential songs in hip-hop history, and it's one of the most sampled and quoted songs of all time. Despite how otherworldly the rest of the Infamous really is, Shook One's almost single-handedly carved Mobb Deep's legacy and taught hip-hop to embrace its dark side. It serves as one of the most integral pieces of New York City's mid-90s hip-hop renaissance. It's a noir rap masterpiece, and it's one of the first successful hip-hop songs with such a somber disposition. The final track on the Infamous is Party Over, which acts as a last call of sorts. It's easy to think that anything after Shook One's would sound inferior, and I think Shook One's was put as the 15th and second to last track on purpose. But Party Over does serve as the aftermath. It does a great job picking up the pieces of the album. It's a darker party jam that remains upbeat and energetic, as Havoc, Prodigy, and Noid somehow save some of their best verses for last. The three MCs tell one last story before throwing the listener out the back door with authority. Party Over fades out with some shoutouts, and just like that, the Infamous comes to a conclusion. That's 1 hour and 7 minutes of some of the best 90s hip-hop that New York City had to offer. On a personal note, I vividly remember my first listening session to the Infamous and how that changed my music taste forever. As a 14-year-old that suffered from severe anxiety, I couldn't quite relate to the violence and the poverty, but something about the somber disposition of the music really appealed to me. While no piece of music has ever done to me what the Infamous did on those marvelous first few listens, the record did turn me on to every other corner of New York hip-hop and allowed me to embrace some of the darker records of the mid-90s quite a bit more. I'm a fan of all types of music, from metal to jazz to electronic to classic rock. There's nothing from those genres or any other genre or even hip-hop to me that compares to the Infamous. It's my Dark Side of the Moon. It's my Sgt. Pepper's. When Prodigy passed away after a lifelong battle with sickle cell anemia in 2017, I told everybody that this was my version of John Lennon. It was my Kurt Cobain, my Jim Morrison, my Selena, my Janis Joplin, my Jimi Hendrix. Prodigy spoke to me from the get-go. From the first time I heard his voice through those scrambled airwaves on the radio. I used to listen to Philadelphia's Power 99 back in the day, and that's where I first heard Shook One's. Following my discovery and purchase of the Infamous, I went out and bought all of Mobb Deep's records, which only went up to, I think, Murder Music at that time. But Prodigy and Havoc, they both spoke to me. They made me realize that my mental health struggles and issues were nothing compared to what they were going through. That's kind of a backhanded way for a white kid kid to get into music like this, but hey, it worked. I don't know. And because of just how telling and dark The Infamous was, there was no better source of this twisted type of empathy than on this record. And The Infamous was a watershed moment in Mobb Deep's storied career. It set them up for success, and they stayed successful one way or another, whether it was financially or critically, for the rest of their existence. Their follow-up, 1996's Hell on Earth, is also one of my favorite albums of all time. It's one of the greatest examples of a late Renaissance record. 1999's Murder Music was driven by the commercial success of Quiet Storm, and it was the most financially impactful album that Mobb Deep ever did. They released the album Infamy in 2001, which was a step back, and then they did Free Agents, the Murder mixtape in 2003, before signing with Queen's cohort 50 Cent in G-Unit. It's no secret that by this time, Mobb Deep's artistic quality had taken a major step back, although album sales remained strong. And despite some weird, awkward Twitter drama in the early 2010s, Prodigy and Havoc stayed together. They even released a double album in 2014, the infamous Mobb Deep. And this would unfortunately be the last Mobb Deep project, as 3 years later, on June 20th, 2017, Prodigy passed away from sickle cell anemia. Perhaps fueled by his lifelong pain from sickle cell, Prodigy just had an unbelievable, energetic career, even though the quality kind of goes up and down depending on what year you're looking at. He and Havoc luckily worked through those early ups and downs in the music industry before they gained the traction to make The Infamous, which is a record that turned their lives and careers around while also changing hip-hop forever. The Infamous is not often seen as the top 2 or 3 most important mid-90s New York hip-hop records, but it should be. It's one of the most essential albums of the era. I do think it's really gotten its flowers in the last 15 or 20 years. I'm glad to see that. But when I was first a fan of this record, a lot of people didn't know Mobb Deep or didn't understand how great they were. It didn't blaze trails the way that Wu-Tang's 36 Chambers did. It didn't offer quite that philosophical street analysis that Illmatic gave us. It did not immediately engage audiences both on the streets and in the suburbs the way Notorious B.I.G.'s Ready to Die did. What it did do is learn from its predecessors and push the boundaries farther than anyone could have imagined. It laid the blueprint for darker, more raw hip-hop artists to succeed, and paved the way for other artists from Queensbridge, from other New York boroughs, and other cities. The Infamous is noir rap's ultimate catalyst. It gave the hip-hop world one of the most celebrated tracks to ever grace airwaves, one that has retroactively become an international sensation. It is in the conversation for the greatest hip-hop song in existence. Even those who are not hip-hop fans have likely heard it in one place or another. The song did reach a new level of popularity in 2002 due to its appearance in the final scenes of the movie 8 Mile, which put it on a radar of a whole different generation and demographic of music listeners. Just for the record, I was bumping Shook Ones years before B-Rabbit's triumphant freestyle. A record that is a rather dastardly embodiment of sonic perfection. The Infamous further solidified the dominance of the dark and graphic, gritty New York hip-hop renaissance of the mid-90s. It's my favorite album of all time, hip-hop or otherwise. Where does it rank on your list? Talk to me about The Infamous. What do you think about it? Am I just romanticizing this thing, or am I onto something? Always love to discuss. Thanks again for joining me for another record retrospective, and to all those who celebrate, happy 30 years to The Infamous.